All right, guys, welcome back for this week's episode. I've got my librarian glasses on again because we're going to be reviewing some more books. And this one's going to be a little bit painful. It had to be done, we got to tell the truth, because these were some of the worst cookbooks that we reviewed in 2020. And now, again with the disclaimer, and now that doesn't necessarily mean that the cookbook itself was written in 2020, because as you know, we're more of a historical and special niche kind of cookbook review channel. And so most of these cookbooks, some of these are actually pretty old, and only one of them was actually really, really new. I think it may have been 2019, but we'll look at that and see. So our first one, I actually don't have it anymore. I donated it right after we reviewed it on our channel. And now that I've said that, I wonder, was that the morally correct thing to do? And should I have just burnt it? I don't know. Let's just talk about some of the problems and then, gosh, yeah, maybe I shouldn't have done that. But anyway, so the first one we had was the Hawaiian cookbook. This is a cookbook my grandmother had picked up while she was on her trip in Hawaii in the 1970s. And when I got it in my collection, I quickly realized that there was no cooking stains, which, if you cook, you're slinging stuff around the kitchen, you're stirring things, and you're just kind of like accidentally spilling or whatever. Your cookbooks with time and use tend to, pick up some little stains or some page crinkles and, things like that. This one was pristine and looked exactly like the day she bought it. And that should have been my first red flag, that she never actually cooked anything out of this. But we decided to go ahead and give it a go and see what we could make out of this cookbook. And not only did we have a terrible time picking which recipe we would do. And sometimes that's a good thing, because the recipes are so good that you just, you really can't pick which one you want to do. But in this case, they all look so bad that we weren't really sure if we wanted to eat it. So we finally settled on something, and it was okay. I mean, we reviewed the food in that episode if you want to check that out. But we were actually more concerned with the fact that we couldn't find anything Hawaiian to cook out of this Hawaiian cookbook. Now the cookbook itself stated that yes, it was made on the island, and it had been put together by people who lived on the island. So you would think that it would have Hawaiian food, but not only was it far and few between, but it was jam-packed with things like Italian lasagna, Welsh rarebit, and all kinds of other European foods that had nothing to do with the island itself. And so we were left really disappointed, because not only did we have this Hawaiian cookbook, but after reviewing this cookbook, we actually learned nothing about Hawaiian cooking or the island itself after doing the review. And in my mind, that's a pretty bad cookbook when the cookbook states that it's going to teach you something, and then you're left not having learned anything about it at all. And so we gave this cookbook a pretty bad review. Now, I'll go ahead and list all these cookbooks, of course, in the description box below, so you can look them up later if you want to. But I would implore you not to buy this cookbook, because there are so many other wonderful Hawaiian cookbooks out there that actually have Hawaiian food. And I have a couple of them that I've added to my collection that we will be reviewing hopefully in the next coming year. And hopefully they will actually teach us something that we wanted to learn all along. And so, yeah, to the person who may have gone to that charity shop and bought that cookbook that I donated, I'm really sorry. I probably shouldn't have done that, and I actually feel kind of bad for having done it to you. My only hope is that you really, really like Italian lasagna and you've always wanted to try Welsh rarebit. If that's the case, then you have the perfect cookbook. Now for our next one, and boy was this a doozy. Oh, I think this is the first cookbook, Ma's Cookin' Mountain Recipes. I'm pretty sure this is the first cookbook that I gave a 0 star to. I might have given it a 1 star just because, I don't know, the food was sort of okay. This was actually first written in 1966. Now, my grandmother picked this up while she was on a vacation in the Great Smoky Mountains in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. However, this cookbook is actually printed and was created and put together by people in Missouri. So I'm not really sure what happened with the whole weird hillbilly mountain Appalachian stereotypes from a cookbook from Missouri, which kind of threw us off a little bit. But one of the worst things about this cookbook was just how, and I mean, I know apparently, I mean, I wasn't there, but I've heard that the 1960s was a different time and the humor was different. And, you know, you gotta kind of look at these historical cookbooks in the lens of the time period that they were written. But as people such as myself who have a large extended Southern family that reaches from Tennessee all the way down to Georgia and everywhere in between, and who happens to live in the South, you know, also, this was borderline offensive to Southern people just with the vernacular. I think that in the review that we did last time, I actually read some of the vernacular in this weird Southern accent that they spell out for you. It's full of just terrible spelling and terrible grammar that I've never actually heard Southern people speak. I know my grandmother, and I may have said this in the other review, you know, my grandmother grew up here and was schooled here in Tennessee, graduated high school here, and her penmanship, her spelling, and her grammar was always better than mine. Now, I happen to be educated for most of my life in Michigan, and my penmanship and spelling could not hold a candle to what she could do. And so I actually found this really the opposite of what I've noticed in my own family and just other people I've been around living in the South. For instance, here's a nice one, and I'm going to say it in the Southern accent that they're indicating and with the spelling that they give. But here's a nice little gem that you're just going to love. Quote, "If the thumb itches, you'll have company." Unquote. So thank you, Cookbook. That was a lovely addition to already worthless recipes. And speaking of worthless recipes, let's go through some of them that you will never ever cook. Creamed sour rabbit. Oh, that sounds wonderful. Old-fashioned coon. Coon and dressing. How to cook coon. Coons and possum. Groundhog. Snapping turtle. These are all things I know that have been eaten through the ages and are still eaten to this day in some parts of the country with some people. And you know what? There's nothing really wrong with that. I mean, if you want to go and hunt rabbits and, you know, you have the means to do that, then that's an actual skill set. That's not actually a bad skill to have. If you can get fresh meat and bypass the grocery store and save some money, I mean, why not? However, when you put it in the context of, well, this is just how all Southern people do it because they're too dumb to go to the grocery store, then you kind of have a problem. I mean, this isn't capitalizing on a skill set. This is making fun of a whole subgroup of people. And haven't we just had enough of that? So let's move on and leave this book in the 1960s where it belongs, because it's not going to add anything to your kitchen. It's pretty bad recipes. They don't really taste that great. And there's not really anything in here that makes it special. This was just a souvenir cash grab that someone threw in a store in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, hoping to make a quick buck off a northern tourist who didn't know any better. Now for our next one. Indian Cookin, without the G, which I'm not really sure why that is, because it's kind of a, when I see something without the G on an ing word, to me it kind of, like, in my experience, it's always been in the form of making fun of stereotypical Southern speech. And so I'm not really sure why this was in connection with native Indian cooking. So that's kind of like, that was the first oddity I noticed. My grandmother picked this up at Wall Drug out in South Dakota. And so this is another little souvenir, cookbook that when you're going out of state, you just kind of tend to pick up on vacation as a memory of the place that you came from. And I was so torn on this cookbook as to whether or not to add it to the worst list or just kind of leave it alone, because this was actually, when I first looked through it, I thought that this had been written by a white person who didn't really know anything about Indian cooking and was just kind of throwing this together to make a quick buck. And I mean, I kind of gathered that from leaving the G off, not really knowing anything about like any of their culture or Southern culture. But then when I looked on the inside, it was actually dedicated to the author's mother, who was actually native Indian. And so this author is actually of white and Indian heritage. And so that kind of threw me a little bit, because while I was looking through it, it does have your very stereotypical, like what most people think of Indian cooking, like fry bread and things of that nature. However, there's also things in here like an Italian lasagna, which is weird because it seems like that Italian lasagna rears its head in almost every bad kind of niche cookbook that we've looked at. Like, for some odd reason, it's just ubiquitous to every cookbook apparently. But it also had, it does actually have some native Indian recipes in here. However, I decided to go ahead and add it to our worst because we now have access, and this one was written, let's see, this one was written in 1973, so it's pretty outdated. We now have access to some really, really good native Indian cookbooks, one of which we talked about in the previous video in our best, the sous chef, and we really enjoyed that one. And so when you look at it in the context of all these other cookbooks that you have access to, this one pales in comparison. And while it may not be fair to compare it to, an actual cookbook as opposed to like a little souvenir cookbook like this one is, there's still, it's just still something that's lacking. Some of these, recipes look interesting, but would I make them? Probably not, because I have access to better ones. So while I don't necessarily hate it, it's not something that I would ever actually recommend to any viewer of this episode. And now we come to probably my most hated cookbook that I've ever reviewed. And I'm going to look at the copyright date on this one really quick, because this one might actually be a 2020 cookbook. Okay, so yeah, this is actually the only one out of our reviews that was actually published in 2020. And this is the Downton Abbey Christmas cookbook. Now, if you're a regular viewer of this channel, you probably saw where I reviewed this the first time. And it was a pretty long episode of all the reasons why my hate went directly into this cookbook. And I had pretty good reasons for saying so. Now, I've gotten a little bit of pushback from some comments, and that's fine. I mean, cookbooks are kind of like reading a literary book. I mean, some people are going to hate it and some people are going to love it. And so it is kind of up to you. However, I still, even after reading all those, other comments, I still just cannot in good conscience recommend this cookbook. The food that we made was good, but it was also very expensive. And, something that I didn't touch on in the review the first time was the fact that I think this is probably one of the most tone-deaf cookbooks that was published in 2020. As everybody is aware of, we had a lot going on in that year, which we're still kind of not seemingly able to get off of that train track yet. However, 2020 was kind of the first of kind of the horror show that started happening. And a lot of people were unemployed, a lot of people lost their jobs, a lot of people were furloughed. Some people had a lot of difficulty trying to draw unemployment to help them get through, what was going on. And then you have a cookbook who wants you to spend $350 on one meal. And in looking through this cookbook, there was nothing that wouldn't cost you maybe your rent, maybe your, electric bill for that month. And the recipes that were accessible and affordable were completely boring. And just why? Things like spinach, apple pie, a cauliflower with cream on it. These are things that almost every cookbook pretty much has. If you have a couple of Betty Crockers, you've already got those recipes. And Betty Crocker, I'm sure, probably did it better and cheaper than this one would had. And so why would you buy a cookbook that you probably already have the cheap, boring recipes in, which, by the way, are far and few between in here. And then the rest of them are just things that you really just can't afford to do. Specifically, given the fact that you would have to order or special order and have shipped to you, kind of odd game meats that we don't really have access to, especially in a lot of parts of America. And then just some of the other ingredients, like the spices and stuff like that would have to be special order. And I thought what was really one of the worst offenses in this cookbook is the fact that they did not do like the first one, which is really good, and I really enjoyed that one. They did not do an upstairs and a downstairs section. So this was all just upstairs, which, you know, if you've watched the show, you kind of know what that reference is. Upstairs meaning the upper class, downstairs meaning the servant class. And so it was really, you know, an interesting thing in the first cookbook to see what the differences between the two food groups would have been. And it also gave you an entire section of the book that was way more accessible to middle-class chefs who may not have all the money in the world to be able to afford, you know, one big, huge first-class dinner. And so we pretty much eviscerated this cookbook on the channel, especially since I had gotten so excited that this came out that I had gone ahead and purchased it new at Barnes & Noble. So I actually ended up paying full price for this. You know, it's cheaper now, obviously, especially after Christmas because, you know, I mean, the whole hype is over with this cookbook. But at $35, I don't even feel like I got $1 worth out of this because what am I gonna do with it? And I hate to get rid of it. Like this is a cookbook that I doubt that I'll actually cook out of because, like I said, it goes from super expensive recipes to just totally boring recipes that I don't care about. So I'm not really sure what I would do with this either. Yeah, the stories are fun. I mean, they talk about, you know, some of the episodes. They talk about the show. You know, they give some historical tidbits. So, you know, like I said on the first review, if you're just wanting this to just read and peruse and not actually use, then yeah, I get it on sale. You know, if you just love Downton Abbey and you just want to do that. But I think it's still, last time I checked, I think it was like $26, like around that mark on Amazon. And even at $26, it is not worth it. Maybe you'll get lucky and find it in a yard sale for $1. You know, I would do that. Maybe if I donate it and you live in my area, then you'll get it for 50 cents out of a, you know, thrift store. Go ahead and buy it. Yeah, for 50 cents, it might be a fun, you know, look through. But for anything beyond that, absolutely not. So there you have it. Our top worst cookbooks that we reviewed in 2020. One that's just kind of odd and I don't think it knows what it is. One that's kind of borderline offensive to Southern people and doesn't really have anything to do with this because I'd never even seen some of these recipes. I mean, I know no one in my family made them. And then we have one that is just so completely tone deaf that it wasn't even funny. Oh, and then of course we have the Hawaiian cookbook that is floating somewhere in a thrift store that I don't know if someone bought it, but if they did, I'm sorry. I'll try not to do that again. So there you have it. Really hope that you enjoyed this wrap-up episode. And for next week, we're going to start into something we haven't done on this channel before, and I am so excited to do it because it will be February. And when I think of February, I think of warm, savory, rich foods that will warm your body and soul on a cold, blustery day. And what was better than tavern food? And when I say tavern food, I mean like actual historical taverns. So we're going to be going to Williamsburg and exploring their tavern foods. We're going to be going to America's oldest tavern that was ever constructed in the 1700s and look at their food. And we're also going to be looking at one, I'm not going to give it away because it's my all-time favorite place. And I actually got to eat at this particular tavern many, many, many times throughout my childhood and even into adulthood. And every time it was wonderful and a wonderful, beautiful experience that I will treasure for as long as I live. So stay tuned for that, because we're going to be making some really good historical food that I really think you're going to want to make in your kitchen. So we'll see you next time. Bye. If you like this video, make sure to hit the like button and hit the subscribe button for future videos. In the meantime, here are 2 videos you may enjoy. Thanks for watching.